Hey everyone, Dan here. The DC Streetcar is set to close later this year, marking an end to its troubled decade-long run. Many people see it as a joke of a line, serving half a corridor in mixed traffic with poor frequency and poor connections, and it's often slower than walking. Despite everybody dunking on the streetcar, it was originally planned to be considerably longer, running all the way from the original planned terminus at Minnesota Avenue past Union Station all the way to Georgetown or Rosslyn. This video will explore the history of this line and what situation could have led to this full line having been built out. This video is a submission to the Classy Whale Alternate History Contest. This video is a submission to 29 Down the Line's Tramuary event. Despite its short distance, the DC Streetcar has a long and complicated history. Ever since the build-out of the Washington Metro, there have been interest in various light rail projects in the DMV. However, the light rail projects in the DMV seem to have less effort and seriousness put into them compared to the Metro system, which is one of the nation's best. This video will explore this scenario. What if WMATA and the DC Department of Transportation took the DC Streetcar seriously? This is the DC Streetcar, a short line from Union Station, Oklahoma Avenue that ran service for 10 years and is set to close at some point later this year. It is a sign of all that went wrong with this once ambitious plan for streetcars to run all across the city. Let's see what happened. WMATA, the agency that runs DC's metro and bus services, began studying the idea of constructing rapid bus, light rail, and streetcar projects around the DC metro area in the late 1990s. These plans were vast and ambitious, with various routes being studied. Among these included the partially built then abandoned Anacostia line, the Purple Line, a line down Columbia Pike, and a line connecting Pentagon to Alexandria, as well as the line that actually got built along 8th Street. We'll talk more about that 8th Street route later. These studies caught the attention of the DC City Council, who pitched in to help with the studies, with a particular interest in a tram line connecting the many neighborhoods south of the Anacostia River. These neighborhoods were the last to be served during the initial metro build-out. The metro services still remaining here are quite poor and the neighborhoods remain underprivileged. With all the various routes to be built, all parties agreed on one thing: the Anacostia streetcar should be built first. The city decided to fund the Anacostia route and issued a fund of $330 million to construct the route. However, when it came to WMATA to fund their part of the project, there were problems. WMATA had elected to fund a much larger swath of projects. These projects included all the aforementioned rail lines, as well as other service improvements such as more metro trains, more frequent buses, BRT projects, and the Silver Line. However, the DC government was less ambitious and wanted to focus on one specific project before committing to more. Basically, while both sides agreed on the streetcar projects, they disagreed on scale. This disagreement ultimately killed or majorly delayed most of these routes. Metro would eventually build the Silver Line, the state of Maryland would build the Purple Line, the proposed line in Alexandria eventually became Metroway, the Columbia Pike streetcar never happened, and DDOT did eventually build the 8th Street line by themselves, and they at least began on the Anacostia line. Yeah, so the Anacostia line remains partially built and abandoned, largely due to an ownership dispute over the Shepherd Industrial Spur, an abandoned rail right-of-way that was going to be used for the track. Basically, no one knows who really owns it, due to a complicated corporate structure. To me, abandoning the entire line over this dispute seemed a little unserious, for a few reasons. First, I imagine with enough legal weight, the true ownership structure could be uncovered, and the right-of-way procured. CSX was willing to give up right-of-way for the line, there were just bureaucratic issues. And even if this couldn't happen, it would still be possible to run the line either down Fairlawn Avenue, Minnesota Avenue, or the Anacostia Freeway. There were definitely other options. The Shepherd Industrial Spur was definitely the best option, however, as it was completely separated from street traffic and wouldn't have to have been built in the middle of a highway. This uninterrupted right-of-way combined with a similar limited traffic path along South Capitol Street would make the Anacostia line feel less like a streetcar and more like a proper LRT project. If this project were to be built to its full potential, it would reinforce the idea that trams and streetcars are a valid transit option in the DC region. So let's say that's exactly what happens. Specifically, WMATA agrees to scale back its ambitions for now and builds and operates and manages the Anacostia line with the DC government's operation and help with funding. Construction originally began in 2004 and was halted in 2010. I would guess this project would be completed around the same amount of time as the 8th Street corridor. Despite its longer mileage, the route is mostly separated from car traffic, minimizing construction disruptions and community complaints. The construction would take roughly 10 years, opening in 2014. After one successful project, WMATA turns to its second line in the main topic of today's video, the 8th Street corridor. In the real timeline, the 8th Street streetcar was the only one of many routes to actually see service. The original plan had this line running from Union Station due east, terminating at the Minnesota Avenue Metro Station. Eventually, the plan was cut back to Benning Road instead, but only ever went as far as Oklahoma Avenue. Only about half of the proposed route was actually built. The route opened in 2016, saw poor ridership, and will be closing at some point later this year. However, given prior experience on the Anacostia line and decades of experience running Metro, I'm confident that WMATA could create a better route on 8th Street than DDOT did. However, it's important to keep in mind that streetcar and tram lines interact much more directly with traffic and land use around it than a standard Metro line, so there will certainly be more compromises than a buried subway or elevated line. Let's see what an improved route would look like. Today's 8th Street line has almost no dedicated transitway or lanes. Let's see what we can do to improve that. Benning Road is quite wide, and a double-track median streetcar here shouldn't be too difficult. In fact, the infrastructure in place there on Benning Road today is actually already pretty good. I would just ban cars on the tracks and make it for buses and streetcars only. Crossing Bladensburg Road onto 8th Street is where things start to get a bit messy. 8th Street is not as wide as Benning Road, and it has a much more sensitive traffic flow. I have 3 ideas to make this streetcar work here. Idea number 1, get rid of the parking. Turn the parking lanes into travel lanes and keep the streetcar in the median. Cars can park on nearby roads, new parking garages along the route, or people could take the streetcar on the routes. Insane idea, I know. Idea number 2, cut 8th Street into 2 traffic lanes. Right now, 8th Street has 4 traffic lanes. We could cut one of the traffic lanes in the middle to make way for a dedicated transitway. Idea 3, pedestrianize 8th Street. Move traffic on 8th Street onto nearby I and G Street between Bladensburg Road and 3rd Street. The streetcar was built here largely as part of an urban revitalization project, so even though it sounds far-fetched, there may be an argument to support it. Not only would this make the 8th Street an ideal transitway, but it could turn it into a proper urban pedestrian model, similar to what you see on 14th Street in Denver. Out of all these, I think the first idea is the most likely to actually happen. Let's cut the parking, create a new few garages along the route, and call it a day. Dedicated transit lanes will help significantly to keep the streetcar from getting caught in traffic, and will make signal priority and preemption easier to implement. Not that I'm confident that any major changes will happen with the signals, unfortunately. At Union Station, there are these fare gates that seem to lead directly to a blank panel on the wall. This panel was supposed to lead to a pedestrian tunnel leading to the Union Station streetcar stop. The station would have been located in the base of the bridge carrying 8th Street over an Amtrak right-of-way. However, WMATA and DDOT were unable to get the rights from Amtrak to develop under the bridge. Right now, walking from the Union Station terminal to the streetcar involves a long, convoluted walk to the bus terminal, and involves crossing into the middle of 8th Street. Let's say this walkway opens as originally planned, giving the streetcar access to an underground transfer point with Union Station as originally planned. Now, all of that gets built out. With construction starting in 2006, this line would take about 10 years to complete, opening in 2016. The line would have a similar footprint to the line that exists now, running from Minnesota Avenue to Union Station, but with the dedicated transit lanes for much of the route and a better connection to Union Station. Well, there were originally plans to extend the line far, far to the west. However, these plans were not particularly concrete, as the terminus varies anywhere from Washington Circle, 26th Street Northwest, Georgetown, Roslyn, or Ballston. The path varies as well, though most proposals had the route shift north to K Street. Some proposals had 2 lines disconnected with a pedestrian bridge near Union Station serving as a transfer, while other plans link the routes directly. Let's explore the options of either having 2 separated lines or 1 long line. If we were to do it as 1 long line, there would need to be a way to move the route from 8th Street up to K Street. The most obvious way to do this is by going up Massachusetts Avenue. The portion of 8th Street leading to Massachusetts Avenue already has transit lanes, so minimal changes are needed here. Massachusetts Avenue is actually quite wide, and has plenty of room on the side to widen if needed to. Take this with forcing a connection at this area, which would involve passengers needing to leave the streetcar, wait for another streetcar. Even if this is an instantaneous connection, which is unlikely, that's going to add a lot of dwell time. I think it makes a lot more sense to just run it as a single line. When it comes to Mount Vernon Square, I really don't think there's a good solution. Throwing tracks into general traffic is really the only answer here. Connecting 8th Street to K Street like this seems completely feasible to me, aside from the Mount Vernon Square area being a bit of a mess. And even separating the route into 2 separate lines with a walking connection wouldn't solve the issue at Mount Vernon Square. Next is K Street, which I think will actually be fairly simple. The entire route to Georgetown has frontage roads with minimal traffic that are practically begging to be turned into some sort of transitway. There's also a divider between the local and through lanes that I think could be redone to a tram track as well. Either option works fine, but for me, let's go with the divider idea, cutting into parking lanes when needed. On K Street, it's smooth sailing until Washington Circle, where once again I only see one real option, and that's street running in the tunnel under the junction. Once west of the junction, the tracks return to the divider for a couple blocks before turning north onto 25th and 26th Streets in mixed traffic, then turning onto Pennsylvania Avenue entering Georgetown. Now, I'm no fool when it comes to routing through Georgetown. Even outside of DC, it is the example of NIMBYism at its extremes. Full transit lanes here are simply not going to happen. I also think a streetcar here is doomed to get stuck in traffic. The way Georgetown's roads are laid out, it would force a streetcar into M Street, which gets incredibly busy, and I really don't see a way around it. With such a poor right-of-way, would a streetcar here even be worth it? I think yes. Georgetown would be such a small part of the route, but having a connection to downtown DC would be worth it. Right after the tram crawls past the Rock Creek Parkway, the rest of the route would go by much quicker. This route could be scheduled with lots of padding in Georgetown, minimizing delays elsewhere on the line. I think there would be a lot of congestion on the Keep Bridge to Roslyn, but I think having a connection to the Roslyn Metro station from Georgetown over the streetcar would be worth it. This would also add redundancy for Metro when the Roslyn Tunnel needs work. I'm not convinced that a Key Bridge crossing would actually happen though, as the bridge is an incredibly sensitive historical site. While we could see something crazy like the rebuilding of the old Aqueduct Bridge, I think really the only way this would work is having streetcars run in mixed traffic over the Key Bridge. Without a solid Potomac crossing, I'm not convinced that running the streetcar further than Roslyn makes much sense, at least not as a unified route, as traffic issues in Georgetown could lead to many delays and bunching on the line further down. This is easier to manage when Georgetown and Roslyn are at the terminus, but a lot harder when they're in the middle of the route. I do think a Roslyn-Ballston streetcar also makes a lot of sense, but I think connecting it as a single route through Georgetown would cause too many problems with congestion and route timing. I could see this route's construction starting immediately after the opening of the 8th Street line that we see today, with shovels in the ground in 2016, and partially opening at some point later this year. Maybe the stretch from Union Station to Washington Square, with the rest to open around 2032. Let's look at some consequences of this plan. Underserved neighborhoods like Georgetown and Capitol Hill would see rail transit service. There would be some level of relief on bus and metro lines. There would be less cars on the road. Real estate investment and denser development would be more justified and more likely to happen. This could have even led to the construction of many more streetcar lines that were in very, very early stages of study. Now, the bad. This plan would not be all good and would have some serious consequences. The biggest question would be the other projects that WMATA was looking into funding. These streetcar projects would have ultimately pulled funding that would have otherwise went towards the Silver Line, Purple Line, Metroway, and major service improvements on Metro, such as new rolling stock and work on automatic train operations. I think it would have delayed the Purple Line more than it had in our timeline, but it would have eventually been built by WMATA as part of a larger unified system with higher quality standards. In this alternate timeline, I think we would see the Purple Line open closer to 2032, not because of delays, but because work wouldn't have started until after the 8th Street and Anacostia lines were confirmed successes. If the Purple Line happens under WMATA, I think we would see a Virginia project happen on a similar scale, either a Roslyn-Ballston streetcar, a Columbia Pike streetcar, or Metroway on rails. I think a large-scale streetcar build-out could have killed the Silver Line entirely. The fact that the Silver Line was even built in real life feels like a happy accident. Whether the streetcars or Silver Line would have been a better project long term is definitely up for debate, but I think there's a good chance that only one of these projects would have happened. I think with the right leadership, the right plans, the right public support, and the right amount of luck, something very similar to this really could have happened and was within the realm of possibility. With many of WMATA's plans from the early 90s eventually being built out, maybe all hope isn't lost for a crosstown streetcar line like this, but I won't get my hopes up. If the trolley bus idea on 8th Street shows signs of success, maybe we could see solid enhanced bus service along this corridor. Now, keen-eyed watchers would have noticed something familiar about this route. That's the fact that the 8th Street K Street corridor talked about in this video has a very similar routing to many of the proposals Metro had for relieving traffic through the Roslyn Tunnel. So what if we took this proposal and buried the rails and tunnels under the road, and then had the start of a DC version of Muni Metro? Nah, that's too crazy.